for the next session. Now, hello to everybody online. Everybody online is watching us. There's about a dozen people online, I think. Is that right? Yeah, about a dozen people online as well. Where are they from? Brooklyn? Okay, so they're all from Ottawa. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. So from all around the world, including Ottawa. All right. So it gives me great pleasure, and I think it's really important to introduce and to have this session on how to include people with lived experience in developing care. And we're kicking off with the Peterborough crew, the KT6 crew. Fantastic. Hey! Yes. Yeah. Who clearly brought their family here. So it's very good. We're going to start off with Jules. Yeah. That's correct. So Jules is a member of the PARN Harm Reduction Strategies, Issues and Shelters Peer Advisory Council. She's a recovered fentanyl addict, turning her shame into light. Good on you. Jules is passionate in helping others who are going through similar experiences. She's a hardworking, compassionate person, now loving life in her light. She's passionate about harm reduction, outreach work, and safe consumption sites, safe supply. And she enjoys spending downtime with a 10-year-old service dog, Ruckus, and Alapa, Blue Blood Bulldog. Is that right? Alapa? Okay.
Alapa, Blue Blood Bulldog.
Fantastic. All right. Following Jules, we have Scotty. Scotty's a member of PARN's Harm Reduction Strategies Issues in Street-Based Issues Peer Advisory Council, so a very important role in the Peer Advisory Council. And he's a strong advocate for homeless rights. And then we have Elaine, who's an Indigenous Harm Reduction Strategies Issues Peer Advisory Council member. She's an Anishinaabe Kwe from Curve Lake First Nation. Elaine brings her native heritage knowledge to the table, as she has traditional knowledge from growing up on the reserve and moving to Peterborough. Elaine has suffered massive amounts of systemic racism as Anishinaabe people face in the white man's world. So really looking forward to hearing what you can educate us on, Elaine. And to wrap it all up is Melissa. Melissa's a member of the PARN Harm Reduction Strategies, Issues and Shelters Advisory Council as well. She's a white settler here on Turtle Island, and there's something crossed out after that, and a substance user who's moved on from dope to other substances. Melissa works doing frontline harm reduction in, oh goodness, I should have checked how to pronounce this, Nogoji Wanong? Yeah? Nogoji Wanong. Yeah?
Nogoji.
Need to give the names proper respect. It was Mario know how to do it. I don't know. So colonially called Peterborough, and helps facilitate a peer group of experts on homelessness, substance use, and multiple organizations. So lots of wisdom here. And take it away, Jules.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to say thank you for having us. This is like a huge opportunity. It's one of our first. We're new. So we're part of the KT6 crew. KT6 stands for like keeping the six. If you guys are aware of any of that term, it's like looking out for one another. You know, we keep the six. It's like a street lingo. And crew stands for compassionate, respect, education, and welcoming. And we're very welcoming. We try to invite as many members to join us as we can. So we just recently started a few months back, and our group is growing largely. We do a lot of outreach work on the harm reduction truck. And so that, you know, is going out to the encampments and stuff and meeting people where they're at and like giving out wound care. Wound care is a big thing. Also, we give out like any harm reduction supplies like needles, pipes. I'm a big fan of Narcan. So we give that out. And if people don't know how to use Narcan, we teach them how to use it properly. And we just get a lot of discussions. We're putting out a survey on how, like, personally, what people like. They're like these pods. It's a survey of pods, and to see their circle of care and who they depend on and who they go to in a time of crisis. We're still waiting. Like we're just getting that out now. It's been a really interesting journey. So I've been a drug addict for a long time. I dealt drugs for a very long time. At one point, I tried to go back to school. I got clean and I tried to go back to school in 2009 to be a community social service worker. I took the whole course. At the beginning of it, I got charged with one joint and I was unable to get my placement because I was on a charge. And I worked so hard at this and it devastated me and sent me into a downward spiral. I'm finally coming out of that spiral, you know, like 10 something years later. And I don't know, being a fentanyl addict is really hard and it's really heavy. And I mean, you go to the hospital with wounds that can take your legs and you're sent away. You're sent away because people don't care. And I think it's not that they don't care, they're just overworked. And they're up because they don't know how to help you, you know. And now it's like I get a lot of reports back from a lot of people. They get sent back saying we don't have time for junkies. When I was going through detox, I got sent to the hospital and I was told to go back. This isn't something like this isn't a shelter, this is a corporation. And I got sent back. And luckily, the shelter I was staying in at the time allowed me to detox there. And this was just before Christmas. It was a violence against women shelter, and I got a lot of support there. Unfortunately, a lot of people do not get a lot of support in the shelters. And it's a really hard spot because where do you go get clean when you know you're at your most vulnerable and you know, you hit a point where you need to get sick and you need to go through it. And everybody around you is just looking to rob you or, they're just looking out for themselves, right? So it's a real sad situation. So I come across I came across this crew at the very beginning when they were starting. I was staying in a sober living house run by E. Fry in Peterborough. And Peterborough has been my game changer. Like, it's a town where I haven't met any, like, they thrive on lived experience. And that is so uplifting, And I think that, you give people a platform to be uplifted and they'll grab onto it and gravitate towards it because we're being respected and we're being listened to and we're being valued as people, not as drug addicts, and you stop shaming people and holding them down and you can really lift them up, right? Or at least give them the tools to lift themselves up. When we're out on the truck, we run into a lot of people that are struggling and, they want help and they, the best thing I can say to them now without being able to go on the truck and being a part of this crew is here. I was just where you were, exactly where you were. You can come be part of me. Show up Friday. We have a drop-in every Friday between 1 and 4, and it's open. And people are allowed to come and get help, and we honor them an honorarium. It's like, it's $20 an hour. It's just a little bit of money. It's a little bit of encouragement, and they're getting paid for their time because what they have to say is very valuable, and they should be paid for their time. And I think that, and it's just been like a game changer. Yeah, it's been a real big game changer. So I'm like really grateful for everybody. And if anybody wants to go next, thank you.
Hey, thanks, Elaine. My name's Scotty. I'm a drug addict, recovering drug addict, homeless person, been on the streets, a leader in everything that I do, and had everything I wanted to say on the top of my head, and it's just gone. But I will share that I lived on the streets for about 10 years downtown Toronto, and I stayed clean for about 12 years. At the beginning of my time staying clean, on the Peterborough drug strategy picked me up as a lived experience as well, to be the person that shared with all the different people about what works and what doesn't work. And that was the first time that I felt like it was inclusive in something, in the position that I was in, to be able to share the things that I had to share. And I've been homeless now about almost close to 2 years down in Peterborough. And yeah, I've been using pretty hardcore IV drug use, cocaine, and a lot of crack. I did the fentanyl for a bit, and I don't know, got very lucky and found my way away from that because that's an evil drug. I don't know, there was a poster at the hub downtown Peterborough that said, come, share your lived experience. And I said, well, who's going to pay me $20 an hour to come and just talk? I didn't really have to say anything in the beginning. I thought, wow, it's so inclusive. I felt inclusive in the community type work. Like, I just felt like I was a part. This brought some type of normality back into my life. Instead of using 24/7 minus sleep time, I felt like I was getting a little more sleep, and I was trying my best to make these different things like harm reduction products, making the harm reduction stuff, serving the people harm reduction work and food and stuff. And this is right up my alley. And this is the easiest paid work I've ever done in my life. And it gives me a little extra money. I'm still using the money that I make to go get high, but I'm making better decisions. I'm here instead of getting high. And I told myself I can't be high or I'm not going to be able to do this kind of work like in this particular setting, I guess. But very grateful for the KT6 crew offering me the opportunity to come and present. And I don't know. I just want to say thanks for listening to what I got to say, and we're going to pass it on to Elaine. You're up, hon.
I'm Elaine. I'm 38 years old. I grew up in Crude Lake First Nation. I recently moved to Peterborough with my twin sister whose house got condemned, then was forced into homelessness. And I have been homeless since 2020. I have no rental experience, so nobody in our district will rent to me because I have no previous landlord rental experience. I am constantly, I suffer systemic racism through the social service department, through the court systems, through everything. The shelters in Peterborough, I've been to many of them, and people will stay there for a year at a time. And once my time is up, my 42 days, I'm kicked out for 2 weeks. Then when I came back, I was on a day-to-day where if I didn't do my housing by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my shit would be out the door waiting for me. And that's no way to live a life. Like, I'm trying to get my life back. I left an abusive husband who I had a 6-figure, like me and him had 6 figures coming in every year, and I walked away from it all just to have my child, which was ripped from my arms because of my ex. And I joined the KT6 to try and help others, but also to help myself in a sense, to show everybody that, because being homeless, people look at you as nothing but a homeless junkie, and all they're going to do is spend the money that they're using for panhandling or whatnot on drugs, which is not cool, which is not true at all. We get $300 a month to live on. How many people do you know lives $300 a month? Do any of you guys? No. Ever suffered not being able to leave your tent? Because if you leave your tent, all of your shit's gonna get taken by the city of Peterborough. And then the Ontario Works will say, well, we just gave you money for that. Well, yeah, you gave me money for it, but Peterborough Police and the city of Peterborough came and demolished everything. So it's a catch-22. But yeah, currently, yes, I am still homeless, and it's really hard. It's really, really hard. The KT6 crew, I was the first one to drive by and have to deal with overdose to another Anishinaabe, and I didn't have a cell phone at the time. And so hopefully by the end, we're going to try and get it so that everybody has a phone, whether it's working or not, but cell phones can call 911. Yeah, I myself alone have saved about 160 people's lives, and it's hard, really, really hard. And people don't get that. They don't understand. I go days without eating, you know, I've gone months without shower. I went from having everything I wanted in the world to having absolutely nothing. And the way that you all come here, and I'm sure you're all, you know, getting your hourly rate or whatever, and then you're gonna go home to your fancy beds, but this is it for us. You know what I mean? Like, once we leave here, we're back on the street. Like, so, but yeah.
Is it on? There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa. I am privileged to be employed at PARN, working, doing frontline harm reduction work is how I originally started. I actually started as a peer in our peer program, just making kits on an afternoon. And I was lucky enough to be engaged with them and to be respected for the knowledge that I was bringing and what I could offer the organization, and got hired. And that was about 4 years ago now. And we've finally gotten back to doing peer work and bringing in people with lived experience. And it's a buzzword, let's be honest right now. I'm glad that it is a specific buzzword that is on this program, and it's something that we're talking about here today. But it is definitely something that can end up being just a box that gets checked off on a grant application, or be able to say, well, we have our peer advisory board of 3 people that we don't pay and don't actually listen to when we make decisions. Um, I'd like to thank my comrades today for really speaking and bringing their experience. I think that everyone in the room here today got to hear the importance of, when we give a voice, when we give a physical microphone to people with lived experience, they get an opportunity to change things. So I really would challenge everyone in this room, when you go back to your organizations, when you go back to your daily work, ask yourself, are we just checking off a box for this lived experience, or are we taking this and incorporating it into the work that we do? Another incredibly important part of this, and we're lucky to have the funding to do so, that's why we're doing this, is that we pay these people. They are experts in staying alive in the time of fentanyl. They are experts in living on the streets and managing day in, day out, working harder than any of us for what they have. If they're experts, if they have this knowledge and this experience, we have to compensate them for it. We can't just ask them to show up, get given a fucking $10 Tim's gift card for an afternoon's work, and then on their way. Like, they make more than I do after taxes, to be honest, because they get cash in hand and they fucking earn it. As I mentioned, like, we are privileged to have the funding to be able to do this. We're looking to turn our, what is currently a project, into a program to make it permanent. Because looking at it from their perspective, this is now something that they can rely on. They now have the like, we have people in the KT6 now that are housed because they were able to save up the money that they're getting paid as honorarium to pay first and last. Like, if you are not currently employed and having any stability, being able to save up $2,000 for first and last is just unimaginable. But what we did is we respected the work these people were doing and gave them the opportunity to have that little bit of stability and the cascade that can flow from that, getting housed, of maybe getting back into the workforce in a way that works for them, of going back to school, or just fucking not, or just have an apartment to sit and get high and play Xbox in, is just as legitimate a result. We're lucky at PARN that we are a very radical organization. Like, we are an AIDS service organization that comes out of the fucking struggle. And because of that, we have had more success in listening to our folks with lived experience, respecting and including them. Another challenge to people in the rooms whose orgs might not be as radical, that might be kind of, you know how it is at your own work, that you will be challenged if you decide that you want to bring people with lived experience into the conversation and to respect them. You are doing things at your org right now, and I know this without knowing where you work, that are oppressive to people with lived experience. That's the same at my job, and we're a pretty radical org, and we're still fucking up. So you're going to be challenged if you decide that lived experience is something you want to integrate into your organization. The way to face that challenge head on is, from day one, listen to these people, do actual check-ins. Like, at the end of every session, we ask, what did we do wrong today? Did anyone leave feeling some sort of way, good or bad, about the work we did here today? And then address that and move forward with it. I got my timer. We're at 15. So I'll leave you with that message. It's like, go back to your work and find out how do you actually include people with lived experience. And when you do so, like, you will just see amazing benefits for organization. You will be able to reach more people. You will be able to go home at night thinking like, shit, stuff's changing, because it does, but only when we actually listen to people like this. Thank you.
So go for it.
One thing. I just want to remind you, okay, so when you get like a peer advisory panel, you're not only learning about how to do your job better and how to relate to people that are struggling, you're also lifting up the people that you're asking for that information. And then nobody nobody knows what it's exactly like to walk in somebody's shoes unless they've actually walked them. And I don't wish anybody to have ever walked in my shoes to be able to gain that knowledge. But there are lots of people that have been in these shoes. Please let us help you, because we need your help as much as you need ours.
It sounds like the dog may have a question. Oh, good on you. So, any questions for people from PARN? Tim.
It'll be more towards the panel. One of the things that I'm a psychiatrist. I work in the homeless shelter system, and I'm an addiction psychiatrist as well. And one of the things that I routinely do now, whenever I see folks at the end of meeting with them, is ask, how did you feel this appointment went? And I'm just wondering how often you folks get that question when you seek healthcare or any kind of clinical care, for in terms of somebody asking you for your opinion of how you thought the appointment went, or your input of things that I, as a doctor or a nurse or social worker, could do a better job.
I know, have any of the three of you ever had that respect at a doctor's office or anything like that?
I have
I've never been asked.
I
Any
think that's
question like
cool.
that, how does the appointment go?
Okay.
You know, maybe my family doctor is more like that, but outside of that,
I can't get a family doctor.
no
Like the
shit.
rest of the world. I think that's a really good thing that you're doing, though.
Okay, I just was wondering, and it was something that actually.
We have two doctors now that signed up for this. It's Dr. Pivot and Dr. Wilson. And they come around to a bunch of the shelters, like all the different campsites and stuff, and they help deal with the customers, or the clients rather, that are in their tents, because a lot of people can't leave their tents, knowing that the minute they leave, everybody and their brothers are kiboshing their shit, or the city's coming to bulldoze it down, and I'm sorry, but we may not have 4 brick walls, but that's all we own.
I would definitely say keep doing that. That is a good question to ask people, and I would be happy if I was in that situation, got asked that. So thank you.
Other questions?
We love questions.
Hi, hello. Yes, you can hear me. Thank you so much for speaking. I really, really appreciate, especially the time it took for you all to come here. I'm wondering, I think it seems like it's such an important thing to have a space fully separate from healthcare medical spaces for people with lived experience, for peer support. But how do you envision healthcare providers, or sort of more social services, helping to create those, or not even helping to create, but just supporting those spaces existing without interfering? Have you seen that done well?
I mean, the thing that immediately occurs to me is money. Like, if you have something in your budget, for instance, that is devoted to better community engagement, find the people in your community that are doing the work already and give them the money to do the work even more. Because I really respect the idea of keeping it siloed off a little bit from healthcare, especially because people often have such oppressive experiences with the healthcare system. But yeah, if you have anything in your budget, find the people doing the work, connect with them. We are such a great return on money to be in. It sounds a bit cocky, but it's true. These people the immense value that they can provide for that. But yeah, like in your community, you've got people that are doing this work. Like find them and find out from them what they need, and they will definitely let you know. Anything else to add?
Social assistance can't really help you out that much as the rate of inflation, the prices of places to live, food, and anything else that you want to do, it's gone up so drastically. When we're getting 1.2%, everything's going up 20, 30, 40%. And how do we manage? And they don't have the funding. Well, there is different pools of funds that you can access to really help you live, you know, even just to get a place to live.
My advice would be to just hiring a peer advisor, a peer support person, hiring them, you know, making that position for somebody that doesn't have to go back to school because we have all the knowledge. You know, maybe give them like a nonviolent crisis intervention course, or, you know, the little ones you can take, right? That'll help you de-escalate stuff, but make that position open, because I'm telling you, you're gonna benefit from it. It'll bridge that gap between you and the person you're trying to help, right?
Daisy has but we need to get you on a mic, otherwise I can't hear you online. Oh, where are you? Sorry, I couldn't see. Sorry.
Turn it up, turn the thing up, push up.
Okay, I was getting really excited when I heard the word activism, and I'm wondering if there's been any initiatives from your community, from the homelessness population, that have gained some grounds in regards to activism. Like what you're doing right now is activism, but are there any other initiatives that you can share with the group for empowerment that you've gained some ground on?
Definitely. The first thing that comes to mind, and I've got a rep, it's called the Tweak Easy in Peterborough. It is a community-based overdose prevention site. It actually opened before our government sanctioned one did, and it is run by community members, both homeless and housed. And so that is an example of someone just seeing a gap and just scraping together resources to start filling it, but then bringing in people who are the ones who are using the site, are the ones that get to help run the site. That's such a huge thing, is that we can often think from our academic or our organizational positions about who is qualified, but everyone is qualified to do this work. And yeah, activism, absolutely. Just opening those spaces, and the Tweak Easy as a community-run organization is another example in Peterborough that is definitely doing that. The community just seeing a need and saying, okay, we got to fill this.
And I got a chance to be part of that for a little while, and it was really cool, because I realized I wasn't triggered because I was helping people. I would be able to give back by knowing, my decision was knowing that nobody ever died at any of these sites, right? And that was the first question I asked, even about Tweak Easy, because it is non-sanctioned. And no, nobody's ever died there. You know, people know how to bring Narcan, and people aren't ashamed, so they're not hiding using, right? And I think that's awesome, and that keeps people alive. And I think that's our goal, is to keep people alive and until they make the decision to be well, you know, or to get better. We need to keep our people alive.
Daisy, just come in.
Yeah, there you go.
Mic check. Thank you very much for your presentations and your call to action. I was just wondering whether, as a collective, because there's strength in numbers, that we could either from this conference also come up with either a code of practice or you know, standards for working with peer workers, people with lived experience, that we can probably end up being co-signatories to as a collective here, as one of the spin-offs from this sort of conference and meeting that can be made available through the resources. So these are the particular standards. If you're going to work with people in these spaces with these experiences that will enrich care and humanity, these are the basics expected. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it can be worded in a way that we then hold different organizations against these standards and probably come up with a charter mark score system. So-and-so health authority or hospital or health system gets a 1 out of 5 Some beacon centers getting a 5 out of 5 for their exemplary work, and you don't retain your 5 out of 5 status, you can lose it in the next year, and so on. Health systems are quite competitive, and once places start looking like 1 out of 5 peer support work charter organizations, they'll buck up against these standards, whereby it's actually peer workers, experts by lived experience doing the evaluation. They're the ones with the clipboards, with the power to score organizations. So it's a call to action using your voice, or respectfully asking to use your voice to make that call to action that we can collectively do. The other, which I've seen in a particular university I'm affiliated with, is they actually have an academic group within the university that are people that are peer support workers. And you cannot have very few research that involve humans, human type research can be signed off without the engagement or the insights and inputs from that expertise. So just some ideas, and hopefully we have a call to action from today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll speak to that initially. Like, I've got the academic experience to basically understand what you asked, and I do appreciate the question. The reason I frame it that way is that our approach to that is letting those sorts of things bubble up organically. I can straight up tell you that we are still in the process of establishing within our own group those operating standards, those understandings. For instance, this trip to Ottawa and juggling number of people in active substance use, making sure that people get well, making sure that people get to respect each other's space. We've fucked up, we've done harm, and I'm gonna own that. And like, we are still learning these things very much. That being said, like, specific to the KT6, I have that sort of academic experience to understand that, and that's something that on the medium term is something I think that we're interested in. I think that if in any group that is getting started, they approach that at the start, that's really going to color the space in a way that is not helpful, because I'll let any of these people speak if they kind of understood the question themselves. But the work is first and foremost for the community, for the people doing the work. I think that what you suggest can very much be beneficial, but the work is so new in respecting peers that like we're still even establishing how to do the work. I think we're a little bit ways yet from being able to codify it in the way you suggest, though it is a very valid suggestion. So thank you for that.
I think just making people want to care about that, because right now society is, they don't care about people that use drugs. Like the majority and the hospitals and stuff, I know it's been I'm not saying like, you know what I mean? But like our own personal experiences, we've been showing firsthand that there's no space for us. They don't give they don't give, you know what I mean? And we've been told that to our faces in like really bad situations. You know, I've almost lost my legs to an infection that I knew nothing about. And I had to learn about it from other street people, because I went to a hospital and they told me I was fine. I was not fine. I almost lost my legs. And let me tell you, it scared the crap out of me, you know, but they didn't care. And I've got this like all across the table. When you go into an emergency ward, when you are an addict and you are in active addiction, people don't care, like the doctors, and it's sad, you know, and I don't know if they're just overworked or understaffed or, you know, and we really got to start changing that there. So that rating system would be great if they cared.
One last question from Tim.
I know you folks started off with your CREW acronym for the values that are important to you. What other values do you think would be important to change the healthcare system? So when you do come to the emergency department, what would be important for doctors or nurses or social workers to be able to, what values do you think the organization should change?
Treating us like a human being. We have a health card. We have a number, you know. I got my health card so I could get health care. Don't treat me like I'm in there because you think I'm dope seeking. I can get better shit on the street. I don't need what comes, you know what I mean? It's like, treat me like a human being, like you would anybody else. And like, I've met a few nurses and doctors, and I end up in tears because I can't believe I just stumbled on somebody that actually cared, you know, and it's because it's so little. And yes, we're dying. We are dying, and we know that. And it's so frustrating. Like, most people will not go to the emergency room. Right now on the street, that is the last place you are to go, right? And that's if you're unconscious, and that's just the way it is. We know this person will help you with this, to take care of this. This person knows about this infection. This person can bring you out of an overdose without Narcan, and we have to go within our community on the street where it's totally not, it's not sterile. It's not, you know what I mean? We're doing this in tents and on the street and in back alleys or whatever, right? And in trap houses, trying to get better because we're ostracized from the place that we should be allowed to get better.
I think one very specific value that institutions could recognize is just quite simply that people who use drugs do so for damn good reasons. The assumption is always that we are immoral, we are weak-willed, we made bad decisions. Nobody fucking literally gambles their life on each bag they pick up unless they're doing it because they need to survive. So if from an institutional perspective, doctors and nurses could recognize you are continuing to do drugs. I am not here to try and get you to stop doing drugs. I'm here so you don't die today and then go back to doing drugs because that is an important part of your survival right now. So that respect for the simple autonomy of people's choices that will continue to include, as long as we're fucking living under capitalism, we're going to keep doing dope. It is really that simple. And if the people in care could honestly just accept that, and that would change so many other ways in which
they accept alcohol.
Well, yeah, that's a very good discussion to have. But yeah, just that simple thing is respecting the choice that someone is making to continue to do drugs, even though it's harming them. That one little shift would change so much. Yeah.
So anytime you see your healthcare professional, your doctor, whatever, ask them, how much education did you get on addictions and mental health through your education? The number I get is 3%, 3 to 5%.
We had people come in and teach a mental health first aid course, and it was very outdated. And the lady was strict by the book and did not want to listen to people with lived experience. She wanted to keep feeding us, and she was very closed-minded. And we had to have a big debriefing about it afterwards, So, I mean, those books and stuff, yeah, you need to learn from people with lived experience, and just listen.
Well, I think appropriate words to end with, really. Yeah, so thank you very much, everybody. Okay, so the next two presentations may actually address part of what Deji said, actually, around guidelines, or at least they might provide some meat to that. So the next person, it gives you great pleasure to introduce, well, there she is, I thought she left, is Nicole Dunn. So Nicole Dunn, she's a PhD candidate. She's in clinical and counseling psychology at the University of Toronto. She's a registered psychotherapist and has worked in community settings that serve people who have witnessed or survived violence. She's also worked in suicide prevention and critical health research for the last 7 years, some of that time in our lab. And her doctoral program research investigates the ecological conditions that contribute to suicide among young women and femmes experiencing housing injustice. Yeah. She's invested in anti-oppressive research and care practices that are life-affirming and promote justice doing. Looking forward to hearing you, Nicole.
I do have some slides. I'm wondering if they might be able to make an appearance. Sorry. Oh, I should be able to use this. Oh, okay. And the button I press to continue. Great. Okay. Hello, everyone. Again, thank you so much for the introduction. It's a real privilege to be in a room with you today and learn alongside you. As Dr. Hatcher mentioned, my name is Nicole, and I'm going to be talking to you about some of the guiding principles that were in play when I did a doctoral research study about how young women and femmes experiencing various forms of housing injustice resist injustice. And I just want to quickly acknowledge this study was made possible with various amounts of funding from different agencies, including the Critical Health and Social Action Lab, SHIRK Canada, Queen's University, and the Ontario Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, where I'm housed. We're going to move through three different pieces of this presentation. I'm just going to begin by talking about my positionality, the context of the research, and then we're going to jump into some guiding principles and some reflection questions that I'm going to pose. So I just want to quickly, oh, I'm talking and it's not moving. That's what was just said. That's me. So I just want to quickly locate myself within this research so that you can understand how I'm in relationship with it. And I think it's important because positionality holds different spaces of power for folks. And in doing so, I hope to make visible some of the identities that I hold that create opportunities for empowerment or dispossession. So to begin, I'm a second generation white settler here in so-called Canada. I'm of Portuguese and Irish ancestry. I'm a cisgender female, and I'm an adult by most definitions. I'm a social worker at heart. I was trained as a community social worker at George Brown College. I became a registered psychotherapist, and now I found myself in the field of clinical psychology. So I like to think I hold many different perspectives on mental health and wellness. And my work history is situated in intimate partner violence and domestic violence, as well as community research at places like Native Child and Family Services Toronto, or here in Algonquin Territory, Ottawa, Minwashin Lodge Indigenous Women's Center. And most importantly, I have no lived experience of housing injustice. So I was really interested in bringing my research experiences, which have largely centered in, I'm gonna remember, I promise. I was really interested in bringing my research experiences working in places like the Hatching Ideas Lab on critical suicidology, closer to understanding why suicidality is occurring among young women and femmes who are experiencing housing injustice in Dishes One Spoon territory, which is Toronto. So my doctoral dissertation title was Engagements with Life, Restoring Suicide Among Young Women and Femmes Experiencing Housing Injustice. And I was really interested in three particular research questions, and they are as follows. What are the mental health needs of young women and femmes experiencing houselessness? What are the ecological dimensions of their distress? And this includes factors like the social, political, environmental, cultural, and structural dimensions. And finally, what are the ways in which young women and femmes resist housing injustice and create care? I wanted to leave this quotation up here just briefly because it's one that we're all on the same page now, I think. This is a really important quotation that guides my work. And ultimately, the project I'm about to talk to you about is one that's born from the observation that people experiencing extreme marginalization are not passive observers in their own survival. And that perhaps we need to tap into places of resistance as places and sites of future possibility and care. So Alan Wade, who is a researcher in Vancouver, Canada, says, whenever people are badly treated, they resist. That is, alongside each history of violence and oppression, there runs a parallel history of prudent, creative, and determined resistance. And that's where this project began. So on two previous slides, I had shown you three different research questions, and I'm going to talk about what I did with them. But I wanted to explain first and foremost that although I'm in clinical psychology research, I like to think that the program I'm talking to you about actually exists somewhere in the interdisciplinary nexus or matrix of clinical counseling, public health, harm reduction, critical suicidology, and art. So when I talked to you about the three different research questions that were used, I wanted to figure out how to answer them best. And what I came up with was two distinct studies. One, which was a narrative inquiry, which is a type of qualitative research where I ask people questions about their lives and the stories that are important to them that they would like to share. And the second one was to create a zine, which was an arts eliciting study, which means there was a call out to the community to share art submissions on a range of topics And I'm grateful many of you here today maybe picked up this zine in the front entrance. It's called Women and Femmes Resisting Housing Injustice and Creating Care. And if you don't know what a zine is a tiny publication that's born from youth counterculture that really seeks to materialize marginalized voices. And often zines are used to share insider knowledge and ideas about we deserve to exist. Briefly, these are the 17 organizations that made this research possible. Some of them are located here in Ottawa. I particularly want to point out for you here today the Evergreen Center for Street Youth, who I've been partnered with and hang out there quite frequently, and Sanctuary Toronto, which is an organization that's almost literally located in my backyard. So the 4 guiding principles I'm going to be talking to you about today that created the zine and contributed to the narrative inquiry, which was the interview portion of my research, are these 4 concepts. And I want to humbly acknowledge with all of you that before I jump into talking about them, these are concepts born from Black, Indigenous, queer, and critical suicidology scholarship. So my first concern when working with young people was, how do I do this research without creating more harm? And this is the belief that all research is actually complicit in some level of harm or extraction, and in some cases more than others. So to do this, I engaged in the concept of intersectionality, which is actually a concept from Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a Black feminist critical scholar. And she introduced intersectionality to help make sense of how Black women's experiences of being Black and a woman create unique forms of discrimination. And I think this concept was important in my research for thinking through what kinds of discrimination are at play when I work with young women and femmes on the streets. And can I name and describe the types of oppression that are showing up and how they might create harm in research? And I had to do that while centering my own ethical research standards, which have different particular mandates about keeping people safe. So when we think about the different types of discrimination and exclusion that come up, obviously working with young people, we see ageism, classism, sexism, transmisogyny, racism, ableism, all of these things individually and sometimes all at once. And so the more I thought about how I wanted to work with young people, the more curious I became about anti-capitalism in research and if those 2 terms can even coexist. So we know that anti-capitalism notes that capitalism leads to inequalities, exploitation, environmental degradation, and other social and economic problems. And as such, I really wanted to think through how I could do research in a way that would not create more harm. So what did this look like? This looked like a few things. One, as a research assistant at the University of Toronto, I'm paid $25 an hour for research. If I was interested in compensating people equally, then they would also be paid $25 an hour. But an intersectionality approach knows that the marginalization and oppression that folks I'm asking to engage in research with far exceeds that experienced by someone who has a research assistant job at the University of Toronto. And so I really wanted to compensate people equitably. And so I gave people $100 for the interviews and $50 for zine submissions, which although is quite significant, I think you could also argue is still low. I paid people in cash and in e-transfers. And sometimes I gave people advances. They said, I need half of this before I can come and participate in your study. I also did not give gift vouchers. I did not think it was appropriate for me to tell people how they should spend their money. I met folks in places where they wanted to meet, so I came to them instead of them coming to me. There was no signing of consent forms. Consent was done verbally. I collected no identifying information. And when it comes to the zine, which you see here today, folks can redact their artwork at any point in time. So my reflection questions on this point, if you're someone who's in research and you're thinking about involving folks in the research process, is what overlapping sites of oppression and discrimination are at play when seeking to include community members in the development of care? Does my information seeking quest equitably and materially improve the lives of people experiencing houselessness? The second principle that guided my work was something called a life-affirming orientation. This one almost needs no explanation, but it's a concept from Dr. Jennifer White, who's a critical suicidologist in Victoria, BC. And at its core, to be life-affirming is to really value the people that we're working with and being in good relationship with one another. So this guiding principle pushed me to think critically about how I wanted participants to emotionally feel when engaged in this research program. So in a research endeavor that seeks to better understand suicidology, could I make every interaction one that actually validated life? So in reflection, I might ask, are my inclusion practices life-affirming? How do I want community members to experience this process emotionally? What is it like for me to sit with other people's pain, joy, and rage? Am I able to affirm the realities community members bring to the experience? The third principle or idea that guided my research program was something called desire-driven research, and it's a concept that is born from Dr. Eve Tuck at the University of Toronto in the Circle Lab. And this point largely informed my methods section. I'm gonna go into how that happened, but I wanted to start by describing desire-driven research by explaining what it is not. So damage-centered research, research that intends to document people's pain and brokenness to hold those in power accountable for their oppression. This kind of research operates with a flawed theory of change. It is often used to leverage reparations or resources for marginalized communities, yet simultaneously reinforces and reinscribes a one-dimensional notion of these people as depleted, ruined, and hopeless. So with this quote in mind, I did not want to accumulate stories of pain from participants in the narrative inquiry or the zine. Instead, I was curious about what gave them life and their hopes for the future. To further describe a desire-driven approach, I think these 3 points are really useful. Dr. Tuck says, desire-based research frameworks are concerned with understanding complexity, contradiction, and the self-determination of lived lives. Desire is involved in the not yet, and at times, not anymore. And desire is not mere wanting, but informed seeking. So these are some of the examples of questions that I asked folks who participate in the narrative inquiry. If your life was a series of chapters, what might the titles be? Can you provide a plot summary for each chapter? I want you to imagine a future for yourself, one that is really positive. What would you like to happen? What would it feel like? How would you get there? What is the turning point in your life story? If it hasn't happened, what would it look like? And what would it feel like? So some reflection questions about if you're looking to engage in desired-centered approaches in research is, what is your theory of change for yourself, for your program development, for making a better world? Am I curious with community members about what care practices have worked for them, what they imagine would have been most supportive? And am I able to name the systems and structures that obscure accessing what participants desire in the now, in the future? Finally, the last principle I'm just going to quickly speak about is one that is justice doing. And this is one that really motivates me personally. It's a concept that Dr. Vicki Reynolds in Vancouver speaks about quite often. We know that the co-creation of generation and knowledge of wisdom is precious, and that when we are holders of this, we have a responsibility to do something good with it. So Dr. Vicki Reynolds says, justice doing involves recognizing and addressing power imbalances and systemic oppression, while also taking action to change these injustices. This includes working to dismantle systems of oppression and advocating for people experiencing marginalization. So in essence, we must honor the knowledge shared by folks by making it available to them immediately. So what did this look like for the doctoral dissertation I'm working on? A few things. One is a city hall deputation for city councilors. One output is the zine, which many of you are able to view today. Yes, open access publications, but there's other possibilities on what this knowledge, how it could be shared. And in some ways, I'm actually not the best person to decide how it will be used. And in that case, it's freely available. So finally, some reflection questions if you're curious about doing justice doing research is, to what extent am I willing to implement the recommendations put forth by community members? How can I address the systemic and institutional inequities that gatekeep the recommendations put forth by community members? And how will the wisdom and expertise gathered be made immediately useful to the community it intends to serve? So our takeaway is really one of humanity, a theme that's been part of this conference, which is scientists and citizens really need to be in good relationship with each other. Thank you for bearing with me, the technical difficulties. Merci, thank you, obrigada, dziękuję.
Thank you, Nicole, for so clearly outlining some of the assumptions we often make but don't put into words around the research that we do. That's fantastic. Any questions or comments? At the back, one of the residents.
Nicole.
Hello?
Hi.
You can hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah, okay. Great. I think the principles are really helpful in terms of research and the academic setting. I was just wondering about the ethics approval. I've heard there was an interview I was hearing with an Indigenous researcher in BC, and they were saying that their ethics board had told them that they can't do verbal consent only, that they need to do a written one, which I think was antithetical to how sort of Indigenous knowledge, or I think she found that elders were very offended when she had like a consent form out or something like that. So how did the ethics process go, and how did you sort of bypass that, or did they agree that you can only do verbal consent?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's something that I definitely rubbed up against. And I consulted a lot to document and describe the harm that could be possible by gathering personal identifying information, particularly if my program of research was subpoenaed. At the end of the day, we really want to protect the identities of participants from any harm at all. And so I think when doing a research application, you just have to make a good justification on how collecting personal identifying information can actually be quite harmful. And I actually expected a lot of pushback, and I did not get any. I made the justification and it was accepted. And I had a lot of consultation from Nicole Edgar and Sarah McLean at the Hatching Ideas Lab, who helped me find some of the documentation that was relevant to making that claim. So I think it was enough to say this is harmful, but there's also research practices that document that in some cases where folks do experience overlapping and interlocking forms of marginalization, that to collect personal identifying information is not acceptable, and that you can just verbally consent.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think we're going to move on, and you've segued into Nicole. Come onto the stage. So our next presenter is Nicole Edgar, one of the people I surround myself with who makes my life easier. She's the clinical research program manager with our lab, but she's also got another life, shockingly, away from the lab. She's actually a board member with Belong Ottawa, including roles on the Human Resources and Strategic Communications Subcommittee and the Advocacy Working Group. And she's been working in patient-oriented mental health research for nearly 9 years, both in Toronto and here, with an interest in suicide prevention, trauma-informed care, mental health care for people who are homeless or vulnerably housed, and health equity. Nicole.
Wonderful. Here we are. So I'm going to be speaking today about embedding the lived experience in strategic planning and advocacy, and giving some examples from Belong Ottawa and how we've been able to hopefully do this well so far. Yes, and the button worked. So a little bit about me. I'm a proud dog mom. You can see my little pup up there in the corner. She's 11 this year, so she's getting old. I'm an auntie to 3 wonderful boys. Love music, food, the outdoors. I've been a board member for about a year now, and I've been with Simon's group for about 5. I don't have any lived experience in this area, so why I'm up here speaking on a lived experience panel. And what I'm really hoping I can do here is actually highlight how we can be good allies and how we can do this work well and make sure that we're amplifying lived experience voices in all areas of our work. So the idea of nothing about us without us has been floating around for quite some time now. In particular, it's been used a lot in research. So this idea that we really shouldn't be making decisions or deciding on care or policy without including the people that these decisions affect. Historically, academic knowledge has been prioritized above all other forms of knowledge, neglecting traditional and experiential knowledge and what that brings to the table. Recent years have brought a shift in thinking where the importance of lived experience voices have been viewed as integral to the success of research and academic ventures, but other areas have fallen behind in that. So the inclusion of lived experience is integral. Research has made great strides in recent years, largely from like a token checkbox on a list when you're submitting an application somewhere, to more meaningful engagement where patient partners work to inform research projects from the ground up. Funders and journals look to have this as a component of the work from the start. And there are some great examples, including a national level strategy for patient engagement, the Ottawa Hospital's Office for Patient Engagement in Research Activities, or OPERA, and patient-facing resources like the Patient Advisory Network that actually supports people in helping them feel empowered when they decide they want to join an advisory group. There's also several stages across participation, so people can participate however they feel comfortable. It doesn't have to be jumping right into leading the project or doing everything. It can just be informing others on how to do that project well. But there's always more work to be done. There are still perceptions that abound about difficult to engage or hard to reach populations, instead of actually thinking about maybe the barriers that we've created to engagement or participation. There's a heavy burden on those who are asked to participate. Often we ask people to partner on multiple projects, and while that's not necessarily a bad thing, we should be mindful about the burden that that creates. There is ongoing tokenism. You'll always come across groups that really just do put a butt in a seat and bring them to the table and then don't actually take their advice seriously or with the importance that it should be. And then there's gatekeeping. So there's making assumptions about someone's ability to participate or contribute instead of actually asking them at what level they're able to contribute. Lived and living experience partnerships in policy are really falling behind. Despite a national strategy for engagement in research, there is no national strategy for amplifying lived experience voices in policymaking. A quick literature search really shows that there's no guidance or literature on this at all, despite organizations repeatedly highlighting that this is important. Involving diverse perspectives in policy is important to make sure that the policies we're making have meaningful and relevant impacts for people. Advocacy groups in particular have really led the way with amplifying lived and living experiences. However, this siloed approach that we continue to take, where we consider research, policy, and advocacy as separate instead of interconnected components of delivering good care, only hinders progress. But we don't have to start from scratch. We don't have to toss the baby out with the bathwater. We really just need to improve on the groundwork that we already have. One great example is the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. They, a few years back, developed an inclusive guidance document on how to inclusively engage people with lived experience for anyone who's interested in working with people who are experiencing homelessness. So this includes policy, advocacy, research, clinicians, anyone who's delving into this work. The 7 guiding principles that they came up with were bringing the lived experience to the forefront, representation at all levels of the organization, valuing contributions and supporting engagement, challenging stigma and oppression while promoting dignity, inclusion in decision-making, equitable representation, and building authentic relationships. And so while guidance documents like this are great to have and they're a great starting point, it can still be hard to make sure that we're implementing these principles well. And so now that we have some context, I'm going to provide 2 examples from Belong Ottawa here in the city. The first is the development of our strategic plan for 22 to 24. And the second is some advocacy work that we're currently doing around the push for decentralizing services. And I encourage you to think about those 7 principles we kind of just talked about and think about what we've done well or what we could still work on in moving forward with this work. So very briefly, Belong Ottawa is an organization here in the city that supports people who are precariously housed or homeless. Our programs offer a safe space so that everyone has a place where they feel they belong and where they're not alone. Our 3 programs offer meals, laundry, showers, social activities, ODSP support, community fridge, computer access, referrals to housing, and health supports. And while Belong Ottawa isn't explicitly a mental health resource in the city, they do care for the overall well-being of the population and are providing more and more supports that dip into the realm of mental health care. And very briefly, our mission is to provide safe spaces that connect people and create community. We offer programs that address basic needs and foster dignity, wellness, and hope for all. And our vision is to create an inclusive community where no one is marginalized and everyone is valued and supported. So in 2021, we began the strategic planning process for what is now called Belong Ottawa. We only just rebranded earlier this year for the next 3 years. From the earliest stages, the project focused on inclusivity and co-production. The plan ultimately ended up containing 6 strategic directions, including participant voice, staff resilience, volunteer engagement, sustainability and growth, neighborhood engagement, and advocacy. The strategic planning working group consisted of 7 individuals, including 1 member with lived experience. The strategic planning process followed key principles, including conducting broad conversation, building champions and ownership, welcoming meaningful discussion on real issues, and embracing strengths and challenges. And people with lived experience from the organization were involved from phases 1 through 4. Phase 5 was the executive level approval. So that was out of anyone's hands at that stage. However, the plan was brought back to each of the programs and presented to the participants so that they could see how their feedback had been incorporated into the final plan. So there were key groups of stakeholders that were engaged, including participants, staff, volunteers, board members, program partners like city shelters and the City of Ottawa itself, the diocese, which oversees the program, and the business improvement areas for where the programs are located. And what I really want to highlight here is that the program participants were actually the biggest contributors to the group. 123 paper surveys were completed across all 3 of our programs, and 5 participants joined into the small focus groups that were hosted. So participants were invited to participate in 4 to 5 facilitated group sessions. The sessions were full-day workshops. Participants were free to come and go as they needed. The first session addressed themes from the consultation and were used to draft the vision and mission statements. And the second session was used to refine strategic directions and how they would measure success. And so some of what came out of the consultation was participants reported wanting to create a safe, inclusive, non-judgmental, and accepting atmosphere. Trust, safety, and a cleaner environment, drug use not being exposed in and outside of the building, as well as an environment that's inclusive, offers activities, and has services that would otherwise be impossible. feel very welcomed, everyone is respectful and helpful, as well as offering resources and support services. So listen to the people who are stressed and need one-on-one, and caring staff. So staff that don't judge, warmth and respect and good companionship from the staff. And so the results of all of this was a strategic plan that creates a culture of its participant voices not only being heard, but is integral to the program's success. A vision and mission that was co-developed by all of the program users. A monthly lived experience committee where participants and staff meet to discuss existing programs, changes that are needed, or new programming ideas. An evaluation after the planning workshops found overwhelmingly positive experiences, with participants feeling that the process was collaborative and interactive. Some changes to the programming have already happened as a direct result of participant consultation. So one thing is respite cots have been added to Center 454. These cots provide a space that people can come in and rest during the day when they're typically not able to use the shelter for rest. I will say these cots are in full use every single day. There's never an empty space. We also now have a work and skill building opportunity. There's a new partnership in the pipeline that is going to actually help to give people more meaningful activities to participate in the daytime, which was, again, direct feedback from those who use the services in the daytime. It'll also potentially open up job partnerships at the end of that program as well. And lunches are now being offered at Center 454. So previously they closed at lunchtime and participants were just kind of sent out for an hour to find their way. So as a direct result of feedback, they now offer lunch service as well. This is just the beginning. We're only 1 year into a 3-year strategic plan. Ongoing initiatives include increasing co-production and collaborative program development, enhancing board engagement and services so that we can better understand what people are going through every day when we're making decisions. That was on hold a little bit for COVID, but now that restrictions are easing, we're able to get into the services more and really see what's going on and volunteer. An ongoing program evaluation that highlights participant needs and experiences. And so what I think we've done well at this point, participants have always been compensated for their involvement, whether that's completing surveys, consultation sessions, program evaluations. Anytime participants are asked for their input, they're compensated for that time. Lived experience partners were always treated equally among stakeholders at all stages, and their feedback was incorporated equally into the strategic plan. Lived experience partners were engaged early and often throughout the process. And experience input was amplified and turned into real-world tangible impacts to the programming in a short time. And just like anything, there are things that we've done well and areas that we can still improve upon. We often talk about hard to reach populations, and while there was good response with the surveys with 123 completed, those who participated in the in-person sessions were typically more stably housed. They were typically people who weren't actively using substances. So we really need to go back and think about why we weren't able to engage others who use our service, like those who are sleeping rough or those who may still actively be using substances, because we need to make sure that our programming serves them well also. So one of the things might be that a full day session was too long, even though people had the freedom to come and go. Another barrier could be potentially comfort in participating in a group. People may not feel okay sitting in a focus group session, offering how they feel. And so introducing opportunities to have one-on-one feedback with their social support worker, a way to provide anonymous feedback, just opening up avenues that aren't speaking up in front of a group. And lastly, the board currently has no relevant lived experience on the committee or the subcommittees. And while the commitment to participate on a board is potentially significant, offering someone flexible involvement or participation on a relevant subcommittee where the burden is less may help to increase representation at this decision-making level. So the next example I kind of want to get into, which is also tied into our strategic plan, is advocating for change. So this is something that as a board, we really want to make sure we're doing well for our community. So you can see some examples up here from the news recently about some of the pretty terrible things that have come out in the news about decentralizing services. We have one person commenting that their neighborhood is turning into a ghetto, or someone else saying that the shelter makes it really hard for them to be a good neighbor. So when we see things like this, it can be really hard to not jump into action and not to respond passionately when we feel strongly about something like this. And so when we see these stigmatizing, hurtful, or just downright rude things in the media, it can be really hard not to just speak up and speak out. But without the lived or living experience voice guiding us, how do we know that we're actually advocating for what people need? And so in response to an opinion piece in the Ottawa Citizen, our board initially drafted a counterpoint response. On reflection, we took some time to consider what change do we want to advocate for here, what is our message, and what is our end goal? And backing up further, we began to consider what the participant needs are in this situation. Does our position advocate for what we think the population's needs are, or are we advocating for what we know that they are? And so we realized we needed to backtrack a little further still. Before we could make a statement, we needed to really understand what the needs of our participants were when it comes to accessing services. We wanted to be sure that we were advocating for the participants. So we're now in the process of better understanding what our participants' needs are, and this will guide our advocacy approach. So we're going to be completing some surveys, asking things about like whether people consider Lower Town and Center Town their home, how far they currently travel to access services, what features are important in the services they choose. If services were moved out of their current area, how hard would it be for them to access them? And what would moving services mean to you? And right now, our services are kind of centrally congregated. And I don't think the answer necessarily is decentralizing, but if people are already traveling far to access our services, maybe we actually need to advocate for services distributed across the city, not closing where they exist, but expanding where people can access them. And so what I hope you can take from this is that people with lived experience should be included as much as possible. Anytime there's something that may impact them, whether this is research, advocacy, service design and delivery, or policy, they should have a seat at the table. Using available guidance to make sure partnerships are meaningful and equitable can start you out on the right foot. While it may not always be easy, it's critical to make sure that what we do meets the needs of those who are accessing our services. And lastly, good things are happening in our communities. Let's really support each other in amplifying lived experience voices. You know, let's connect and share our best practices with each other and make sure that we're really doing things well. And I really just want to acknowledge all the participants of Belong Ottawa. You know, they help to shape our programming every day. The Belong Ottawa Strategic Planning Working Group, as well as the current management board. Yeah, the end.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Any questions for Nicole? I can feel the energy in the room going to that mid-afternoon drop. But I've got a question. How do you cope with disagreement? Or conflict? Because, you know, the sort of simple model of involving people with lived experiences is you say yes to everything. Or that's one potential area of conflict is do you take advice you don't agree with? And the second is there isn't like a uniform lived experience. Now, people may have different lived experiences which will inform what you do. And I just wondered how you cope with that.
So that was a conflict they had actually in the focus groups. It was one of the challenges that was introduced into the focus group. I think having a strong kind of moderator in the group that can validate everyone's experiences and make sure that everyone's experiences are reflected where it's possible. You're never going to make everyone happy. That's just true in life, full stop. In terms of, I forgot, what was the first part of your question?
How do you manage conflict? How do you accept advice you don't agree with?
Yeah, so I mean, I think recognizing that I'm not the expert at the table, you know, as the, you know, kind of the executive director really led this, I think stepping back and recognizing that the lived experience people that they invited to work on the strategic plans are the ones who access the service, and how we shape future growth of the service should be based around what they want to see through the services, whether I agree with it or not.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, good. Michaela.
So this is a bit of a follow-up to that question. I've been in some settings where I think it's really clear that lived experience is welcomed if it's docile, if it agrees with the power structures, and if it's not critical. And sort of I'm thinking back to the presentation by the KT6 crew. I don't know if folks are still here, but whereas like said very clearly, like this is a politicized group, this is a radical group who's based in community and has a politic. And I think in some spaces, at least, I've seen a depoliticization of peer work and lived experience work. I've certainly heard some colleagues with lived experience talk about that. And so I'm wondering if you could speak about that, because I think there's selection that happens and we do a huge disservice. And I think it's like profoundly unethical to select for people. And I think this goes beyond lived experience, but who are going to agree with the power structures necessarily.
Yeah. So I will say that the peers that are currently involved were not selected, like they're a self-selected group. So they may, like that in itself is a problem that introduces bias when you have a self-selected group, but it's not the leadership of the organization going out and saying, hey, like we think you'd be a good fit for this. Do you want to come sit by me? I don't think we're as radical as KT6 by any means. I don't think we have the space for that, but we do really try to, make sure that this is an inclusive space, that everyone feels like they're heard and represented in what we're doing with the work, the programming that's offered. But yeah, it's not a situation where we're saying like, oh, we think this person won't be, a shit disturber, so let's bring them onto the committee. Like it is an open invitation.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, it's clearly, the whole session is clearly something we need to do well, and I think we will return to in future meetings, if we have future meetings. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody, for attending this afternoon.